All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Will It eSport, everybody's favorite show where we take a look at, your favorite video games and games from across the board and we answer the question, will it eSport? I, as always, am your host, Alex, aka Overlord, and I am joined today by my co-host, Jenna, aka Giraffero. Say hello.
Hello. I'm excited to be here today.
Good. I'm glad. This is going to be an awesome show for you guys today. So, essentially, like we just said, we're going to be breaking down games, seeing, what we like, what we don't like, and for you, what really makes an esport? What do you think is the key foundations of an esport?
Three things. I think that player reception, viewership, and continual support by a development studio makes those. Now, kind of going a little bit more into detail, we know player reception, right? On a casual level and a competitive level, you have to have support from your main player base. That's just a simple fact of any game. When it comes to viewership, Twitch viewership, big event viewership, it really just comes down to, are these players supporting and consuming the material that your game is providing them? Are they enjoying what they're seeing? Are they commenting on it? Criticism, everything surrounding that. And again, continual support from the game development studio. That's going to be a huge factor as well, because you have to look at, is this studio trying to continually improve their game, or are they leaving it stagnant, letting these players consume all of this gameplay without even trying to improve on their current status?
I think you're totally right there, and I think that improvement is the name of the game, especially when it comes to making something that's a long-lasting foundation of the esports community and something that can last as long as people want it to last. Especially the game developers, who need to make sure that they're continually updating the games, making sure that there's exciting content and there's new things for players to come back to. Even the veteran players should be able to come back and say, oh look, there's something fresh, there's something new, there's something that we can definitely play around with. And but it's also got the same element of the familiar, that a veteran player could come back and be like, hey, look at this, I remember this from way back when. And I think that the game that we're looking at today certainly has a lot of those elements. So the game that we are looking at today is Rainbow Six Siege. Very, very popular. Jenna herself was, a caster, still is a caster for T3 Siege, has done casting for a number of leagues. I think that it's going to be a very interesting game, to kind of discuss with us, it seems like a staple, but really it hasn't been around for long when you take a look at some of the longer standing esports games. So for just a little bit of background for people who have no idea whatsoever what Rainbow Six is, it's a tactical first-person shooter that was developed by Ubisoft in 2015, and it basically focuses on some tactical realism. It's taken a bit of a departure from that in recent years, but it kind of focuses on realism, making sure, one-shot headshots, that kind of deal. And then there are certain operators that people can play with special abilities and gadgets. There are over 55 million registered players and about 25,000 people in the current comp scene worldwide. Again, that's just kind of a rough estimate. I mean, what are your thoughts on Rainbow Six Siege as an esport?
My thoughts. I mean, that's a really broad topic to actually
Yeah,
be touching
yeah.
right off the bat. My thoughts. I think that over time, Ubisoft has had their blunders, they have had their issues with this game, but being with the competitive nature of Rainbow Six Siege and talking to a lot of competitive players, talking to a lot of just regularly, even casual players, the biggest factor that brings people back to this game, even when they take a huge loss, even when they're unmotivated to play this game, is that huge competitive nature, wanting to do better for yourself, wanting to improve as an individual player and as a team, given that you're in that competitive setting. I think that's a huge motivator for a lot of people to be playing this game, to be consuming the material that comes out of this game. And frankly, I mean, just that in itself really makes Rainbow Six Siege a pretty decent esports game. But with the changes that Ubisoft has made, there's been a lot of controversy throughout the years with the things that they've done. I mean, for example, Operation Health, that was not a good,
That
yeah,
was
that was not a
not
good
well
period.
received by
Yeah, it
anybody.
was it was not. No, it was not well received by anybody. If you guys don't know what Operation Health is, it basically was an entire season of gameplay for Ubisoft to do a diagnostic test on the game to figure out where they're going wrong, to figure out where the game is going wrong, and to make improvements based off of that. I think subjectively, I'll look at that in a second, but objectively, they did a lot of changes. They did do a lot of changes. Subjectively, not all of those changes were an
Good
improvement and
changes.
increase, yeah, to the gameplay of things. There was just a lot of differing things. And for me, being a personal player that has played since the release of this game, I have gone through the highs and lows, the trials and tribulations of every single little bit of this game, coming from PS4, moving on eventually to PC, and just casting this game as well. I've had a lot of significant experiences having to just deal with this game, just the absolute, I just a giant of a game.
Oh
There's
yes,
a lot
yes.
of good things and a lot of bad.
I think you're definitely right there. So I mean, why don't we break down the scenes? So obviously we got the professional scene, and that's kind of got your current pro league, your siege invitationals, your majors, and you know, at the end of the day, I think that's when people think of Rainbow Six Esports, that's usually what they think about. Is they're like, oh, big money tournaments. I remember the Sledgehammer, and it basically just, you know, when people think of esports, at least with the Rainbow Six, that's kind of what they think of. And then I know I'm sure that you could definitely do a better job of explaining the amateur scene than I could. But you know, why don't you give us kind of a rundown of what the amateur scene looks like?
The amateur scene, if you think about almost like a chart, you have the top pro league teams that are the trendsetters for everything. You have the T2 teams that are a little bit of trend setting in the way that they play the game, but for the most part, they take away from the pro league side of things. And then you have T3, which is at the bottom. They essentially take away everything. They try to consume as much as they can from pro league and T2 and form that into their own versions of pro league. And while I think that there is a pretty big skill gap in between Pro League and T3. There are just a lot of similarities with how they play the game and how they carry out their operations day to day. It's just T3 is a really huge side. It's basically just amateur. It's just amateur Pro League people trying to get to Pro League. They're trying to get to T2. They're trying to claw their way up the ranks, and it's almost like a higher level of ranked in the game, because we know, there's a casual side and there's a ranked side of the game. It's a higher level, and it's those really extremely competitive people that come together and they say, hey, you know what, we can do this, as a team. We can make a 5-player team very well rounded and take all of our performances, take all of our individual play styles and combine them and merge out to be a wonderful team. And
Yeah,
frankly, I
yeah.
think a lot of T3 teams have done that. I know I'm going crazy here, but I think a lot of T3 teams have done that, and they've been really successful with it. It's just there are a lot of teams that filter out. There are a lot of teams that can't make it and don't have the motivation to do so. And I've seen that personally. I've seen a lot of individual players as well. They filtered out because they just simply don't have the motivation for this game, and this game does create an environment where there's a lot of toxicity, especially in the casual community and the ranked community. There's a lot of just things that exponentially increase your motivation in its entirety and increase your will to just want to play esports, because it's a hard game. It
Oh yeah,
requires
for sure.
dedication. It does,
I
yeah.
mean, the learning curve on Siege is, you know, if a normal game is like this, it's like it's literally like a 90-degree angle, right? Like it is. I would say Rainbow Six Siege is probably one of the most difficult games to learn, at least for competitive. And I think even then, the scene itself is so diverse. I mean, if you asked, you know, 10 different people, I'm sure they would all give you 10 different definitions on, you know, how the tiers work and what the different, you know, versions of Siege are, and kind of how those respective scenes operate. So I mean, you know, it's really interesting to me to kind of break that down and to see what do people qualify as certain tiers of esport, and what do they kind of want to see. And I know that, you know, you talked about the toxicity in the community, and I think that, you know, that's something that I've certainly experienced firsthand. I mean, I built this org in Rainbow Six Siege, so I've definitely seen both the highs and the lows. You know, pretty big lows, but again, it's all. If I had to describe the amateur scene in one word, I would say, or in a phrase, I would say it's high risk, high reward. Right? You're either gonna do, you gotta be willing to put all in. You gotta be willing to motivate yourself, to push yourself. You know, past what you think you're capable of, and then, if you think you have what it takes there, then then you could certainly thrive in the scene that exists currently. And I mean, unfortunately, I think what we're seeing, and I'm definitely going to defer to your opinion on this, but I do think we're starting to see almost sort of a stagnation in the Rainbow Six scene. I mean, it's been around for 5 years, and they want to keep it going for another 5, and I feel like people are just kind of starting to trail off a little bit. I mean, what are your thoughts on like the stagnation there?
I agree 100%. Throughout the past month or so, I commented about this on quite a lot of, different platforms, that there are a lot of people who leave this scene even before their competitive career starts. And that says something. That says something because you're right. It's like clawing your way up. It's high risk, high reward. You have to put everything in and you have to give it dedication in order to even start a competitive career. And honestly, I commend the players that have put their 5 years
Oh,
of time
absolutely.
into, right, like Bolo, like Boy, like, oh my gosh, like the big flagship players of this game who have made a name for themselves off of simply putting in dedication and time to this game, being extremely mechanically minded and just having a mind space for this type of competition. But like I said, there's just a lot of people who are dropping off. There's a lot of things that are converging around us right now that is leading to a decreased player base, that is leading to a decreased viewership as a total. And right now, it is a lot because of Ubi. I really agree that it is a lot because of Ubisoft and the way that they're mishandling the game. They are taking it in a certain direction that honestly I'm not here for. I don't really want to see. They're
You're not
doing a
vibing with
lot of
it.
different changes. Yeah, they're not vibing with it. They're not vibing with it. They're doing a lot of changes to the game that I just don't like. Like, they are not adding new game material to the game. They haven't done that for a pretty long time. I mean, yeah, maybe here and there with some guns, some player abilities, some operators, but overall, they haven't really added a new map for a really long time. They haven't added new game material for a really long time. No real new events, no new charms, no new anything. It's just the same thing. It's the same exact thing, and eventually that's going to stagnate once, especially pro players, once competitive players figure out the game and they get to that point where nothing else can be done, where it's just a continual battle to see who can be better at this game. It's no strategy involved. It's no real, getting creative with the game and trying to do better that way, because there is no creativity that can be added to the game. There is no new thing that can just change the dynamic of the game. And that's also bolstered by the fact that this pandemic hasn't really added on to anything either. I mean, there's just simply a lot of events that have been canceled. We know that the SI event got postponed, and because of that, you're not going to be seeing the Pro League players and the Pro League teams being premiered at their best at understanding, new strategies, coming out with new dynamics. Thus, the T3 scene, it is going to stagnate because you don't see that higher level of play being able to trickle down to the lower levels.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right there. And I think that with the latest direction that Ubisoft has kind of taken into like franchising, right? And to go for these like location-based teams, and I guarantee you there's going to be a buy-in of some sort, but it to me it feels like the wrong direction, right? Because if you're going to build up a community on the idea that anyone can be someone, right? Like anyone could be, I don't know about the next Bolo, but the number of times I've heard, "Oh, I'm going to be the next Bolo." But, like I just think that if you're going to build a community based off of the idea that you can claw your way to the top, no matter how much of a long shot it seems to be, that it isn't just pay $500,000, get yourself a spot in the league, and it doesn't matter how good your players are, you're automatically given that spot, right? Like I would say the entire like motto around the siege scene would be earned, not given, right? Like you have to put your blood, sweat, and tears into making it to CL, to Pro League, to all of these higher levels of competition. And I just think that like if Ubisoft continues to balance the game the way it does, if they continue to take it in the franchise direction that Overwatch has taken it, that Call of Duty has taken it, I think that it's going to be alienating a lot of their player base, and it's going to be making them feel like, you know what, what's the point of an amateur scene anymore, right? Like, streamers these days are getting more viewers than the leagues themselves are, and to the average individual player, right, it's the gun skill that they're looking for, and provided they can just communicate well, they're going to get placed on a team. So it's, I would say, again, it's all about managing, like, how much of it is earned and how much of it is given, and how much are you going to have to kind of fiddle with those two dials in order to make sure that, you know, it feels evenly balanced.
Oh yeah, no. I agree with you with that entirely as well. It is a lot about trying to balance out the scales of trying to balance out the scales of like, you know, is this team going to, and I've seen this premiered in T3 leagues too, which is absolutely horrible, by the way. Is this team worth it? Is this team going to fit our criteria? Or is this team going to buy their way into this league and have the most horrible players have the least amount of entertainment value and not give anything to this league other than us, give us money, give us our sustenance that we need to keep this going, and honestly just put down the entertainment value of everything that we have been working for as a whole. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that Ubisoft would want to do that, but it happens. And it's so unfortunate that it happens, but it just it's the way that the corporate world works. I feel like Ubisoft specifically is taking a shift towards the corporate world of things. It's more of a selfish payout base than it is a selfless intrinsic motivation of you trying to feed entertainment value to the masses. It's trying to feed yourself money. It's trying to keep yourself going. And I mean, hey, want to get that bag, you want to get your coins, but like
Oh yeah, secure
no,
the
there's a
bag.
certain level. Yeah, there's a certain level that goes, and frankly, I feel like we're starting to move towards the level of selfish motivation, extrinsic, that you know it's not going to get us anywhere.
You know what? Yeah, I think, unfortunately, I have to agree with you, and I think that, you know, I think a lot of players now would agree with you, and a majority of the scene, I feel like, just isn't the same. I hate to sound like, you know, an old timer, but like back in my day, like it, you know, it's not the same as it was. And, you know, I think at the end of the day, we just need to ask ourselves the simple question, you know, and as we kind of wrap this up, I mean, just we need to ask ourselves the question: will it esport, right? You know, we know that it esports currently. Has it esports in the past? Sure, right? But will it esport in the future, right? And I think that's the question that we kind of have to ask ourselves.
Opinion, I think Pro League is going to stay around until the death of the game. It's going to stay around until Ubisoft eventually kills it off and there's no more support for the game, and all these players have to move on towards new games, which by that time all of these players will have most likely moved on to new games because, as you know, skill level, it normally translates to different games. So pro players most likely will eventually turn to different games like Valorant, an up and coming game that's coming in this scene. But when it comes down to amateur, I think that it being a much less consistent version of competitive play, of competitive stylistic play, that it will most likely go down and it will be the first to die out of anything if this competitive scene does eventually go down, because of the fact that it's the lowest level of play. These players aren't entirely committed to doing this. These players haven't made a job out of this yet, and there is still time for them to move on to another game. There's still time for them to take away their commitment from this game and just leave. And I think that's why a lot of T3 players are not motivated, or they're being repelled away from this game because they know, I can leave and nobody's gonna barely care about it. I can leave and there's gonna be somebody else that takes my place. There's gonna be somebody else who is going to ultimately be better than me and is going to overtake me. And frankly, just that ideal, just that theory is a huge factor of why, T3, it it's there. It's there because it's a feeding tube into T2. It's there to be a feeding tube into T1. And T1, honestly, it's it's interesting. It's
Yeah.
interesting. It's new, it's dynamic, but it'll eventually die along with the rest of the competitive scene. I mean, as all games do, every game has a stock life, or every game has a shelf life, rather. And eventually, if Ubisoft cannot make these changes that they need to, if they cannot give new game material to consume to the masses, then yeah, T3 is going to go down. It's going to be, a pillar, a foundation of the tower of Rainbow Six Siege that's going to fall. And then it's going to be T2 that's going to fall. And then eventually T1, at the end of everything, after all the players have left, after the building has been evacuated, then that's when the CEOs of Ubisoft go down with the ship and this entire thing crumbles all the way down.
I mean, that reminds me of like the life cycle of a star, no? Just slowly compressing in on itself until there's nothing left there.
It reminds me of the Titanic.
It
reminds
gotcha.
me of that movie. It's like, and I know this sounds so bad. It sounds so bad because the T3 players, they're going to be getting off the ship first. They're going to be just either jumping ship, leaving the scene entirely, or going to new pastures. And then it's going to be the T2 players that go down, and then the T1 players that go down eventually. Some of them will be able to leave. Others are just going to leave the scene entirely. And I think more T1 players are going to leave the scene entirely than it will be going on to different games.
Yeah.
And then the captains of Ubisoft, they're going to be going down with the ship. They're not going to try to jump ship. And funny enough, the captain of the Titanic actually did not go down. He didn't even go down with the ship. But eventually, the CEOs of Ubisoft, they're just going to be.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I were to answer the question, will it eSport? I mean, you definitely gave a much better, longer answer than I did. But in terms of, for me, will it eSport? I think in the future, not exactly, right? I think, like you said, I think we're going to see a slow decay. I think very soon here we might see like a serious decay, at least in terms of the T3 scene. And I think things are soon to follow. I think, content on Rainbow Six hasn't been as popular as it has been in previous months. And I do think that's partially due to like what you're talking about, like the staleness of the game. Like you got to keep new maps, you got to get new and exciting ways to play the game, or else it starts to get really old really quickly. So I definitely think that like in terms of will it esport, not exactly. I think we're gonna see a decay, and I think that we're gonna be soon we're gonna be on board the Titanic. I think that's a.
And it comes down to the player base. Are they going to want to jump ship? Are they going to die along with the Titanic? Or are they going to get on those lifeboats and try to go to greener and newer pastures?
Yep. I mean, I totally agree with you there. All right. Well, this was the first episode of Will It eSport. I was your host, Alex, a.k.a. Overlord, and I was joined today by my co-host, Jenna, a.k.a. Giraffero. And we will see you all in the next episode, where we will be tackling a whole different game and what the implications of that game are for its near future. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all in the next episode.